Hi, I'm Norman Solomon. Sometimes I use the title Rabbi, and it may fit this present conversation, but sometimes I use other titles or none at all. And as I've fully retired, I don't have a profession anymore, but I've done a lot of things like being a rabbi, being a professor, and all this sort of stuff.
Okay, well, because we don't have to start with rabbi, I have a non-rabbi question. Because I went and looked up your information, and your bio said that you and your wife have at different times done music recitals. So I'm curious about this. I'm also curious about in the descriptions of the music recitals you've done, you specifically call out Schubert's Trout Quintet. And so I'm just curious, is
Oh,
this a absolutely beloved music piece for you?
yeah. Oh, indeed. But you speak of my first wife,
Okay.
Zikrona Livracha, who was a fine musician. I've been blessed with two wonderful wives, the first one for 43 years. And the saddest episode in my life has been, of course, when I lost her. But fortunately, I continued and remarried. But my first wife was a musician, violinist, excellent violinist. I was a musician. Still think of myself primarily as a musician, though it's
Really?
never been my official uh, profession. Uh, the performance you allude to of the Trout Quintet sticks in my mind because of a young lady, a girl of 16 at the time, who was a member of my congregation when I was a rabbi and had learnt the double bass, which was fine, except that one at least of her parents had to accompany her everywhere to carry the instrument. And she was a fine double bass player. But after the performance of the Trout, she was rather miserable. I said, well, what's the matter? What went wrong? I played a wrong note. Oh, no, I didn't hear a wrong note on the double bass. And I'm not sure that anybody else did either. But this is perfectionism. And very good. Get all the right notes in the right places does help. But there's more to Schubert than right notes in the right places. It has to sing, whether anything from the double bass up to the violin. You must sing. And I think in that performance, I was playing piano.
Mm-hmm.
I also played cello, but I recall that was a piano performance on my part, which is the only instrument I play now.
So tell me if you actually think of yourself, if you're an embodied human being, you think of yourself first as a musician, that must mean music has a primal place in your life and your heart.
Yeah.
Where did that start? And then where did that veer from your professions?
Well, it started, I suppose, about the age of 6 or something, when I was sent and had music lessons. And I think I made, in retrospect, I think I can claim really good progress. And continued to take lessons and had good opportunities for chamber music and uh, grew up with that. And I would compose as well. I've still got a manuscript which I wrote when I was about 7.
Wow.
And it's called Red Pepper. I can't remember why it was called Red Pepper, but
It doesn't have any lyrics to help you understand why you called it red pepper.
well, I don't know. I'll have to look into it sometime if I can still find it. I don't know. These things go on. So, and I had some. Because then I went to university,
Mm-hmm.
but I haven't said much about my early life, which I think is really quite germane to talking about the book that
Oh,
you often
please.
comment on, because in a way I've been writing it all the time since childhood. Sort of thinking about trying to make sense of God. Now, how did that happen? Is it all right if I give you a little bit of autobiography? I mean,
Yeah, perfect. Especially if at the end you promise you're going to have totally made sense of God. That's great.
Now, first of all, where are we? The geography. Where was I born and bred?
Yeah.
In Gwlad, Wales, in the great country, part of the United Kingdom, in the capital, Cardiff. How did I get there? Miracles. My father turned up at the age of 12 or 13, from Poland, having escaped the oppressive Jewish life of the village where he lived, as much as the other troubles that they had in Poland. This is back in 1910. So he came to Cardiff because he already had a bit of family there. He had an older brother and so on. So that's how he landed in Cardiff. And my mother landed there. She was a Londoner, some generations in London. But she is the eldest of 4 children, and her father died very young when the youngest was born, and she was farmed out to an aunt in Cardiff. Now, I don't know why I'm telling you all this, but there we are. It's just getting it off. Might as well. So I was born the same year that Hitler, may his name be blotted out, came to power. In other words, 1933. So have to live through those events as well. But of course, we were living happily in Cardiff. We had bombs. I mean, one of my earliest memories is bombs falling, and we had to move out of the city for a bit, and we were on a hill, and we could see flames when they were bombing the docks. Cardiff is an important, or was an important dock. No longer, actually, because they've built around it. But at that time, during the war, it was. So my upbringing was during the war years and before and after. And my family were they were very strongly Jewish, but not religious.
Okay.
So, okay, I was sent to the synagogue. I was sent to shul. I was sent to classes, not taken.
I work with these kids. They're sent by their parents, yes.
But somehow it caught on, and I was sort of interested. Standard of teaching in the classes was mostly bad, but I was fortunate again. I had the good fortune of having a very good teacher who was in Cardiff just for a short time, a year or so. I got to know him well in later years, a very fine Hebrew scholar, from whom I'd learned something. And so this was interesting. But at the same time, I was growing up in a family who were not particularly religious, and I was thinking about things and about God. And what is this about God? We had a maid at the time who used to go to Sunday school. I think she was a Christian maid. And I think she'd mentioned God. God was not often spoken of in the house, but, nobody wasn't denied or anything, but that was that. So I got interested. And met up with some religious people. We had some families, Jewish Orthodox families, who were living in Cardiff at the time, who'd left Germany in the 30s, and they were there. And I was friendly with them as well, and they influenced me considerably. Anyway, so the main part of the story is this. Here am I, a young boy of maybe 12 or 13, and hearing about God. And not very many religious people around me, whether Jewish or Christian. Even in school, most of the boys were not there. care less about that. Not anti-Semitic or anything. If anything, they were anti-Catholic. That's right. But and I mean, I think Jews benefited from that because they had another enemy to contend with.
Yeah.
I mean, it's often enough like that. But I didn't suffer from anti. Oh, yes, I recall now one anti-Semitic incident. There was a boy in the playground. I must have been about 10, who picked on me for being Jewish and something, I don't know what it was, and started a fight. Much to my surprise, because I wasn't used to fighting, I won the fight. Gave him a bloody nose. After that, he was my best friend.
Really?
And kept bringing me presents. And we maintain this. I mean, so that's the sort of background I had. And wasn't sort of aware of anti-Semitism in the way that people talk about it now, despite the fact that we knew things were going on in the continent, but I didn't know much about that either. So, God. And so I learned a bit of Hebrew.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent teacher, 2 excellent teachers, actually. There's another local one who was quite good. But, and I sat in the shul, and the Torah is being read. And I could translate a little bit by Adaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying. And I remember I would sit there and I'd think about these words and what was it like? If I'd been there, what would I have seen? The Lord speaking to Moses. Or if I was Moses, or if I was Moshe Rabbeinu, what would it feel like if he was speaking to me? So I couldn't imagine really what it might have been like, but I thought there's clever people up there. They're like the rabbi, the chief rabbi, and the bishops and the archbishops, and they must know.
Yes.
So in later life, I got to know many chief rabbis and archbishops. Believe me, they didn't know any better than I did.
Dang, you'd establish these good questions as a kid, and none of the adults can answer them.
Yeah. So that's how it is. So I got interested in theology, which is not something they teach in the elementary schools, but or even in high school, which I went to.
Yeah.
But I started reading, and who brought me to Judaism more than anybody else, you will be surprised when you hear, was Thomas Aquinas.
Wow.
I read some of his work in English translation, and I was very taken with it because he is a man who was reasonable, he's rational, and he's talking about God. Not like some of the rubbish I used to hear in conventional classes and teaching. And it struck me. I mean, he's also talking about Jesus a bit, but it didn't. It was, as I was to put it, water off a duck's back. Didn't make an impression, one way or the other. So I read Augustine and I read Aquinas, and that prepared me for. I heard there were Jewish thinkers as well, so I got a copy of Maimonides, the Guide for the Perplexed.
Mm-hmm.
And despite what everybody says that he was so difficult, and it's still to me easy, straightforward. And so I read some of that. So that sort of formed my ideas on God for the time being. And it was integrated into a practical program of Judaism, mainly through the German families that I had met. The rabbi of Cardiff at the time, the Orthodox rabbi, a fine rabbi, but I used to go to him and learn something from him, but didn't hit it off quite that well with him as with the German group. So that was it. School. By the time I finished school, I was quite religious of what I understood and observant. It was very annoying to the family.
I was going to ask how your new orthodoxy matched up with the family.
Yes, yes. It could be difficult for them.
Okay.
But we were a loving family and we managed.
Yeah.
My brother had an older brother, 9 years older, but he was off in the army.
Mm-hmm.
He was just caught up at the end of the war, and he went over as part of the occupying forces in Germany. Well, we got on well enough, but he was very the opposite of me as far as religion was concerned.
Did you ever have a period in your younger days when you felt this urge to kind of Kiruv Chabad style, like bring them to the faith with you, or you never tried that?
No. I tended to keep it to myself. And so I think I could say, honestly, I was fairly accommodating as well, and to try and fit in with family and things. To the best of my ability. Only in later years I realized I must have been a nuisance.
You think back, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's so interesting. There was sort of a Catholic Christian theology, and then, well, I can jettison the Trinity, I can jettison Jesus. Their talk about God and their thinking around theology are interesting to me.
Yeah.
That kind of answers, I kind of had a question. I wondered what sparked this line of inquiry. And I'm also curious about, you said, I feel like I've been writing this book all my life. Then the question is, well, I'm curious, why didn't you write it earlier? And I have ideas about what the answers could be, but why do you think it came now and finished now?
I mean, I've written a number of other books.
Yes, I saw those, a litany, yeah.
Usually for specific purposes. Either it was commissioned by some publisher or I think probably one of the first was my doctoral thesis. The things have the reason. But nobody had ever asked me to produce something on attitudes to God, and I hadn't done so. The opportunity came.
Yeah.
And, in a way, I was very glad that I hadn't tried sooner, because one needs a certain freedom of expression. And as long as you're part of an organization, it's difficult to attain that freedom of expression. I had an interesting example of this fairly recently. You probably would have heard of our previous chief rabbi, Jonathan Sachs, Solomon, he is a good scholar and a theologian as well, and a trade. And it happened that I was asked to review the last book that he wrote.
Okay. Which
is on some philosophical aspect of ethics. And I had to say, I read several of his books, but this time I felt that it's really, he is coming out himself, because he's no longer the chief rabbi. He doesn't have to look over his shoulder who is going to say this and who is going to say that. And it affects us all to some extent. I mean, if you're, obviously, when I was a rabbi in an Orthodox synagogue, I had to be careful up to in what you say. But even when I became an academic, academia has its fashions and its standards, and if you go against them, you can be in trouble. You have,
right.
You're sensitive to it. So once I had retired, and I'm not answerable to anybody, and I can let my own feelings and perceptions develop as I wish. So that's what I was feeling. writing this.
Is, in your words, what was your purpose for writing the book? What did you intend to get in the book? And then did you have a clear intent? I want audiences to get this, or did you just have this thing that needed to come out, and then once it's out, you're done?
Primarily, it needed to come out.
Okay.
But I was at the same time aware that a lot of people are having similar thoughts, and maybe it's of interest to them as well.
So there seems to be the very title of the book opens the idea that God may not mean, we may not all be talking about the same idea of God. The word God gets thrown around all the time. And is that a major thread of your thinking of that is a problem? The problem for all of us when we use the term God, we're not meaning the same thing. We're not really interrogating or questioning that word enough.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. Language changes over time. Obviously, it must do. And, you're reading an ancient work like the Bible. You have to put yourself in the frame of mind and the sort of understanding available at that time to know what it is saying. So take a passage about God. Yes. God is coming on a chariot and throwing down rain on those who... And if I would say that today, it'd be ridiculous. But if I'm saying it in biblical times, no, it is conveying something. And how do I grasp the essence of that and still tell the same story? That means use the same words, but get into the heart of it, which can't be exactly the same as my predecessors 2,000 years ago. What do you mean when you're using that? And it is important to me still to be able to use the same language and talk the same sort of talk. But I can't be saying the same thing exactly because my presuppositions are all different.
So obviously that is obviously a hard stretch, especially for strands of people who want to get back to the book. And this is less in Judaism because it has this powerful force of the Talmud, all this argument and law and thinking that holds people from just saying, I can read the Torah and it will tell me what it says. But of course, the Protestants have exactly this problem. I can read the old Bible and just open it and I can understand what it says with the help of the Holy Spirit. And it's a beautiful idea, but...
Yes. Of course, Rashi is responsible for Protestantism. Did you know that?
No. Was he an inspiration to these Protestants?
I'm not really joking. I'm exaggerating, but not joking. Okay. Because if you read the commentary of Rashi, he's a classical, he's the great master.
Of course.
But to some extent, he regurgitates the Midrash and what it says there. But he is surprisingly critical. He has mastered the new science, as it was, of Hebrew grammar. And he is asking, what did this verse actually say? What is the plain meaning of the verse? And so on.
Yes.
And, of course, he was translated into Latin. He was used by Christians quite a lot. When they are also searching for, never mind what the church has pronounced, but what does the text really say?
Yeah.
So he is actually part of this movement of rereading the ancient texts and peering into them. So, of course, I exaggerate. I say he's responsible for the rise of Protestantism.
Understood. You're not saying it was Rashi and Martin Luther.
I think Martin Luther had to go as well.
Is that Is Rashi's work there, is that closest to you more than the more tradition-mediated years and years of oral Torah? In other words, is one of those closer to you, or you hold them both?
Well, it is, yes. Yes, I would have to say yes. I find a lot of the more traditional interpretations problematic.
Okay. It's a good word to use.
Yes.
What did this mean as you sort of, you didn't gloss over it, but you mentioned obviously when you work inside institutions and you have a responsibility to communities and you can't just wander off on your own scholarly way. Is there something you wish you had been able to bring into the community? More historical study, more study of is there something you wish you could have brought more of?
Yes, I would certainly accept that. And I think that historical study is very important. Things have to be contextualized in correct history, including the Talmud and the sages. I mean, I'm still teaching Talmud to have a group of people. And it is so important to realize who is saying what when and just what they mean. Let me give you an example of reading. Well, let's take the opening of the Bible.
Okay.
First chapter of Genesis. Right. What's it about? Creation.
Right.
So people say, well, but it's not the same as the science tells us. Sure it isn't. If I was living 2,500 years ago, fine. I just take it straight as it is. I read it now, and I get quite a different message from it. A very powerful message indeed. Bereshis, as we have it, is a denial. What is it a denial of? Well, it is a denial of the teachings which were common in that part of the world at that time on what existed and what didn't exist. My first question about Genesis is, what has been left out? If I was living back at the time that it was first put out, let's say some ceremony and the priests are reading out, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and I'm listening to this carefully, and I'm expecting that I'll be told where everything came from. I'm not. What about angels? What about spirits of all sorts? What about the gods? Not mentioned. Denied. And in fact, the rabbis have to bend over backwards to say, oh, why didn't they mention the angels there? Because they were created on the Friday in the twilight or so. This sort of stuff. Nonsensical. So it is an absolute denial of the existence of other things. So that's lesson number one. Or take the generations. Generations from Adam to Noah. You look at it today with today's eyes and you think, oh, exaggerations. Methuselah lived to 960.
Right.
If I lived in the 7th century BCE or thereabouts, and I'd have been brought up, I'd have heard about the antediluvians. Just a moment.
Sure.
I would have heard about them, and so when I read the ages in Genesis, the first thing I noticed is they didn't live long. Nobody lived 1,000 years, whereas in the epic of Gilgamesh and so on, and then where you've got lists of antediluvian kings, they're living tens of thousands of years.
So at least they're shrinking it. It seems outrageous.
They're all the way to being gods.
Yeah.
But 1,000 years in God's eyes is but a day. And nobody lived 1,000 years. You get a different message if you're listening now and if you were listening then. And we have to take on board the history and say, what did it sound like to the people who heard it first?
But it's difficult because there's always that sense that you want these texts to be, quote unquote, eternal, in some way forever the same. You want them to be forever the same. And so contextualizing as a modern, how come I can't go right to the source and just understand the thing without, again, historical context, anthropological understanding, a yearning for it to be simpler?
Well, unfortunately, things are not simple.
Okay.
Because the world has changed in the last 3,000 years.
Okay, yes, that's true.
It's changed in my lifetime, never mind the last 3,000 years. Changed radically. Would you believe it? When I set out, there was still a quite thriving flat Earth society. People who were arguing that the Earth was flat. I mean, they were a bit out of date already then, but
there's still they made a whole documentary about the fact that there's still those people propagating that stuff on the internet.
Yeah. Oh, they're still at it. I don't know.
Yeah, right. They're still at it, unfortunately.
We can't. And to me, the key is actually language. I haven't said anything about language yet, but how the use of language changes and the various things it does. So it's twofold. A, we have to understand the changes of language, but then why do we tell the same story in the same words? This is because it is a bonding within a community. The theologians would explain this way and explain that way. Let them do it. But if we're all telling different stories, there is no community. The story is preserved. We still tell the same story of Genesis. We'll have to understand it a bit differently, that's all. But it binds us together. We can all say, yes, this is the divine story of creation.
Well, it feels like going to services then and experiencing, regardless of whether it's a Devar Torah or a Drash, experiencing the Torah reading, it does always, again, lend the risk. If you don't go study this on your own, if you don't go look at these things on your own and learn more, you go on the holy day and you listen to them read the Torah and you read the story in there, and then you think, there's truth. It's not just a story.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you can share the story with everyone, which is important. That's what a myth is. I mean, I use the word myth. I have to be really careful because, in ordinary talk, if you say myth, you mean that somebody's talking nonsense.
Yes.
So, but I'm using it in the more technical sense, as an anthropologist might use it. A myth is a narrative that binds a community and conveys something of importance to them. And it's important to have myths. Every society has myths. There are modern myths. I've got a chapter in the book about modern myths because I thought it's so important to make the point.
Yeah.
Example of a modern myth. Well, let's think of something. Democracy is the best form of government. Now, what on earth we mean by democracy, I don't know.
Sure.
But it's good to talk like that. And it points the right way. If you're a philosopher, you can put it to pieces. You say democracy won't work. Plato argues against it. It's an unstable form of government, and whatever you like. But it's an important myth to bind our society together. Another one, money. There's no such thing as money. There are conventions by which we exchange goods with each other in a certain
Yes.
ratio. But there isn't a substance called money, but it is a myth which is fundamental in our society.
How does that come up, given the fact that there can be many interpretations and understanding when we say the word God, or we can hear a simple story out of the Torah scroll and it sounds simple, but it's actually very not simple. And there are many ways to look at it.
Yeah.
What happens? You had this early experience of comparative religion where you were brought in a bit to God by reading these Christian theologians. When you confront now in the era today, I feel like comparative religion and the idea that all religions are pointing to a singular truth. How do you feel about that?
I did spend several years in interfaith dialogues. Constantly had this sort of question. And yes, sure. We all have myths, stories, whatever it is, which account for the ultimate, whatever. But you can't disentangle that entirely from the structures in which the stories are embedded. And hence we have different religions, and we have to have mutual respect. But to recognize what there is behind it. I mean, I've heard discussions in recent times.
Yeah.
Because there's mainly, Islam and even Christianity are easy to accommodate from a Jewish point of view, as far as God is concerned, at any rate. But the Indian religions and so on, it may be a bit more difficult. And there are a lot of scholars, theologians now, who are saying, well, you cannot look on the average Hindu now as the idolater in the Old Testament. And so we draw distinctions about that, and I think this has to be recognized. To me, idolatry is something rather different. It is whenever somebody gets attached too strongly to a particular form or idea, it becomes the idol. It can be ideologies of certain sorts. Everything will be all right as long as we're all communists or whatever. You know what I mean? Socialism is the answer, or whatever. No, it may be a good thing, and it may be used. It has its place. You have to see things in their place, but we don't have ultimate solutions, ultimate things which become the only thing that matters. And this is, unfortunately, a danger to which religions themselves are prone, of taking a particular notion, and this is the answer to all our problems. It's not so. There is no one answer to every problem. This is where I see idolatry, rather than in sort of actual practical images of gods or something.
Is there a way in which you think, so Judaism kind of calls a lot, again, against idolatry, but cleave to God, hold to God, love God, stick to God. Does that I think you've mentioned a little bit that religions can overdo it with their ideas, but can you cleave too much to whatever your idea of God is?
No, I don't think it affects the idea of God in the way that I'm presenting it, but what it is aimed at much more are people like Kabbalists and so on who have, I don't want to talk now about Kabbalah because maybe another time.
Okay.
But who insist on different aspects of that, and and this is what you have to do, and then it all will come right, and the Mashiach will come. And indeed, messianism is probably one of the worst forms of idolatry.